Okay. Energy. Okay, so I am very pleased to continue our sessions. Good morning, everyone. Let's continue our workshop, Fragmentation and Solidarity, with the second day, discussing fragmentation and solidarity in work and law. And for first presentation, I'm pleased to open the space for Professor Stefan Vosswinkel with the presentation, Meaningful Work. Please.
Thank you very much. It's on, okay? Because there's so much crowd, I have to use the microphone. Thank you very much for the invitation and the possibility, Yes, for the possibility to talk to you. It would be a possibility to research authoritarian structures if I from above to you. Okay, my issue is meaningful work, and I hope you will understand what this issue has to do with fragmentation and solidarity, because I would start with some ideas about what is the meaning of meaningful work. Let me say that the lack of identification with work, or more banally said, reluctance to work, is taken for granted in neoclassical labor market theories, because their models assume that work, understood as a negative good, is only offered when it is compared to a consideration, namely the fee. All theories of motivation through financial incentives are thus implicitly theories of alienation, which take for granted that work is alienated, so it has no intrinsic value. It does not seem meaningful to people in this sense. However, this contradicts a modern understanding of work. Here, work is understood as something that gives people self-esteem, recognition, and belonging that constitutes their probation in the world, and thus essentially determines the social status of the human being. Accordingly, people are not only working for instrumental motives, not just to buy consumer goods. The empirical research, which I conducted with Stefanie Hürtgen, shows how important the meaning of their work is to the interviewed employees. I want to emphasize here and appreciate Stefanie's contribution to the following considerations. Nevertheless, the sociology of work has always been confronted with experiences of alienation and meaningless work. Work in capitalism has been understood as fundamentally alienated since Marx. In the following, I will assume that for humans, work is both source of meaning and suffering, source of identity and object of dissociation. And the way these two sides of work relate to each other has much to do with whether people can appropriate work and whether they can understand themselves as social beings by working. In other words, the meaning of the work is always about the relationship between fragmentation and solidarity. Meaning has a double meaning in sociology. On the one hand, it means the comprehensibility of action for the agent himself and for others, referring to institutionalized interpretations and valuations existing in society. It enables people to adjust to each other in their actions and is reflected in symbols. In addition to this cognitive meaning, there is an evaluative meaning of meaning closer to everyday language use. Here the distinction between meaningful and meaningless is central. Obviously, meaningful is better than meaningless, and in this sense we speak positively of a meaningful work. To speak of meaningful work has two dimensions. In one dimension, we can pinpoint meaning of work on the individual's subjective experience of meaningfulness. Often the meaning of meaning is not clearly differentiated from neighboring categories such as the work should be fun, It should fulfill one. One should be able to develop or even realize oneself. One should be recognized in the work. At the end of the day, you should know that you have achieved a result. The work should correspond to one's own competences and qualifications. I can do the work effectively. But meaning can not only be determined subjectively, but it is socially institutionalized. There are shared ideas about what is meaningful and what is meaningless. The subjective meaning does not necessarily coincide with a socially shared meaning. Nevertheless, the individual will often be aware of this deviation, at least latently. In my presentation, I will first deal with the societal meaning of work. I will understand meaninglessness as alienation and reformulate the concept of alienation following Rachel Jägi as refused appropriation. Appropriation is not an individual process, but regulated by institutionalized definitions of meaning. Finally, I will deal with the meaningful execution of work, a category not identical to the meaningful product of work. After that, I will show how, in different ways, Fordist and flexible capitalism make it difficult to appropriate work as meaningful. In the light of two empirical studies in recent years, I want to show that one of the key claims of employees is doing meaningful work and doing it meaningfully, and that it can become a psychological strain to experience work as meaningless. Finally, I critically point out that sociology of work, at least in Germany, focuses exclusively on the execution of work in a meaningful way, and thereby takes on an individualizing perspective. In contrast, modern forms of work are usually cooperative, and consequently collegiality and solidarity are central elements of meaningful work, but weakened by fragmentation processes. Meaning refers to socially shared, institutionalized interpretations and valuations. The meaning of some work is undisputed, for example, that patient or geriatric care. Others are controversial. Arms production, for example, is thought to be meaningful by some and to be not meaningful by others. Depending on the context or the subculture, different interpretations are often in conflict. Common to the different interpretations, however, is that they relate meaning to something outside the phenomenon itself. Arms production, for example, is then interpreted and evaluated to determine whether it benefits or damages the community or society. In this respect, it is about the use value of the work. On the other hand, one can also speak of the meaning of work in relation to the aspect of exchange value. Then the category of meaning approaches that of function. The function of work in a capitalist society is basically to give the worker income and give the surplus value and profit to the owner of the capital. When we speak of the meaning of work in the general usage of whether a work or a work product seems meaningful to us, we usually mean the use value of the work, its social benefit. The individual work activity is then located in the overall social division of labor and measured by its contribution to the common good. In modern differentiated societies, however, this use value is more mediated, more abstract than in pre-modern societies. Following Emil Durkheim, this does not necessarily mean that the meaning of work is lost in a differentiated society. Rather, precisely in the social division of labor, with the generalized dependency of people on each other, it can also become clear that together with the production of products and services, they reproduce society. That is, the meaning of the work can only be social. Durkheim therefore spoke of organic solidarity, a form of solidarity not based on similarity and closeness, but on diversity and interdependence. That organic solidarity is not always and inevitably produced. In his theory of anomie, Durkheim made clear the threat to modern societies through isolation and fragmentation. If solidarity is to emerge in differentiated societies, then this requires an understanding of the context and importance of the own contribution, which in turn requires transparency in the context of the work. Referring to Durkheim, Axel Honneth sees an essential core of an intrinsic critique of capitalist work in denying the possibility of understanding and experiencing the contribution of one's own work in the context of the social division of labor. Because the societal use value of work is more difficult to understand in modern societies, the people often hold to works whose benefits are directly tangible for others. Medical and nursing activities, consultations, the production of products which are immediately recognizable as useful products, that is, works whose meaningfulness is tangible. But it would be a pre-modern prejudice to consider any work whose utility is not directly experienceable as not meaningful. Rather, recognition is given in generalized form. As Robert Castel has shown, for example, legal recognition of workers as a productive factor and as a working citizen is a form of abstract generalized recognition of the usefulness of work in general. This institutionalizes a generalized attribution of meaning to the dependent labor, conveys its fundamental recognition, and ties it at the same time to the status of the respectable wage earner. Even if work has its meaning in societal use value, it is often not possible for people to directly experience this meaning. They must appropriate this meaning, overcome the distance between themselves and the work, the given alienation. Appropriation of work is a practical activity that is realized in the process of work. In this process of appropriation, the worker also alters his own nature. He forms his identity essentially in the work. In it, the human deals with an object, the material or matter, the tool, or a problem of customers or clients in the development of a concept, for instance. These are resistant, Christophe Dejour says, otherwise the work would not be exhausting. The confrontation with the resistance presupposes willpower, attention, and competence. To overcome these resistances means to prove oneself. Probation refers to the value regime and the normative order in the sense of Boltanski and Thévenot. Appropriation is not a merely subjective or individual process. It is sustained or hampered by the experience or lack of recognition by others and society. The conditions of work make the appropriation possible to varying degrees, and the forms of cooperation and competition in the work allow or hinder the recognition and experience of the sociality of work. Appropriation is a process between the workers and the work. I agree with the concept of Rahel Yegi, a representative of contemporary critical theory in Germany. Unlike an idea of alienation as the disruption of a given unity of human being, she assumes that people must overcome an ever-present alienness through a process of appropriation. The alienness of work is characteristic for a society in which people basically do not work the way they want to work, not produce what they want to produce. However, because they do not want to be strangers to work, because they want to do something meaningful, because work is important to their identity, they try to reduce this relation of alienness by appropriating the work. This is an exhausting process, often associated with disappointment. Whether it succeeds depends not only on the abilities of the individual, but also and above all on the structures and conditions of the work. Although wage employment fundamentally reproduces alienness, the forms and conditions of labor differ in how they make the appropriation of work difficult or possible. Processes of appropriation are regulated by social institutions. They determine societal expectations for dealing with work and the normative patterns according to which one can expect and demand recognition for work. The values which are attributed to specific works and which constitute the social meaning of the respective work are socially institutionalized. A doctor belongs to a profession whose job is to produce health, a high social value. This determines the social benefit of the activity, its appreciation. A garbage workman ensures hygiene and cleanliness. Automobile workers are involved in the production of cars that make mobility possible. These are different socially anchored meanings of work. They construct tracks, processes of appropriation and probation are rolling along, giving individuals an orientation for the appropriation of work. Above all, métiers and professions are central to regulation on a mesosocial level. They reproduce ideas of good work, appropriate execution of work and performance. In particular, they promote social concepts of the value and social significance of each profession. However, social prestige, income and meaning of work do not coincide. This is a statement that cannot be emphasized enough. I would like to clarify this by comparing doctors with garbage workmen. There is general agreement that the doctor is doing a meaningful job, that she is filling a job with high social prestige and that she is entitled to a high income accordingly. The garbage workman is different. No one would deny that the garbage workman does a meaningful job, and garbage workmen have learned to recall this with strikes. But on the other hand, the child is often threatened to become a garbage man if it does not learn properly at school. This profession has a low social prestige and the income is limited too. It is instructive that the social meaning of work is often emphasized precisely by those whose social prestige is low, especially with regard to income and education. Think of the already mentioned garbage workman or the classical producer pride of the physically working person. Especially those who do simple work emphasize their necessity and usefulness and often compensate for the fact that they cannot understand their work as self-realization. The reference to meaningful work here emphasizes the sacrifice, the severity of the work, and claims for appreciation, precisely because one can expect no admiration for a competence, success, and income. So reclaiming the meaning of work contains both consolation and a potential of criticism and resistance. So far, I have spoken of the meaning of work, which is determined by the usefulness of the work, its meaning in the social reproduction process. This is different from another dimension of meaningful work, which is not about the meaning of the product, but about whether work can be executed in a meaningful way. Here, the meaning of the work product is rather irrelevant. Instead, it is about whether work can be done in a way that is rational, efficient, and where workers can use their skills appropriately. Meaningful work can be done in a meaningless way. And on the other hand, work that is not considered meaningful can be executed rationally and efficiently. I want to clarify the difference. Geriatric care is considered as meaningful work per se. But the framework of the care organization or the regulations of payment often make it impossible to do this way, work in a meaningful way. If care services, such as personal address, the maintenance of joy of life, the elevation of burdensome restrictions, cannot be properly accounted for and do not get the appropriate space in the timetable of the care organization, with the effect that the geriatric nurses can perform them only insufficiently and informally, then they also experience this work which is basically meaningful as meaningless work. Meaningfulness and meaningful execution of the work are interrelated. The basic conditions of the work are central to whether the work can be understood as meaningful. If you cannot perform your work in a meaningful way, you also lose the feeling that you are doing meaningful work. Perhaps one can say that a feeling of meaninglessness arises particularly when a work that has been judged meaningful cannot be executed meaningfully. Working components that are experienced as superflows because they do not contribute to the rational production of results can destroy the meaning of a work, as well as a work in which the use-value logic is subordinated to the economically cost-benefit logic. Precarious forms of employment whose perspective is indefinite because make it difficult to appropriate this work. The increasing short-term nature of employment relationships, as well as the accelerated changes in work process and organizational restructuring, make it difficult that professional identity can mature. So far, I had pointed out that a meaningful work in itself can be perceived as meaningless if it is not executed in a meaningful way. But what about the other way around? If a job that is in itself meaningless can be done rationally and efficiently, if the employees can contribute their skills and if they enjoy their work. Does the rational work performance also illuminate the result of work and give it an aura of the meaningful? For example, can a pacifist engineer see the competent and efficient production of tanks as meaningful? Such questions cannot be answered clearly. This is a cognitive dissonance that can be dealt with in various ways. Perhaps the pacifist engineer sets his pacifism down over the medium term. Maybe he'll leave arms production instead. It may be that he adapts to his work environment and sees it as a sign of the meaningfulness of the work product if it can be done efficiently. It may also be that the pacifist tank engineer develops an instrumental relationship to his work or applies coping strategies if he cannot give it up because he has no job alternatives. But very often he will suffer from the meaningless work. In the history of capitalism, roughly speaking and ideally pointed, we can distinguish two forms of alienation, or more precisely, impeded appropriation of work. Those in the Taylorist Fordist and those in flexible post-Fordist capitalism. The classical analysis of alienating work focused on the Taylorist work organization in Fordism. Conceptually, Taylorism was based on expropriating the experiential knowledge of the worker and reinforcing the alienation with the separation of planning and executive work. The workers produced community among those who shared a similar fate, a similar life, a similar time structure, a similar work-relatedness, and a common adversary, the management. The trade union organization and the similarity of the situation gave rise to solidarity. It was solidarity in the same social position, in Durkheim's words, mechanical solidarity. This is different in times of post-Fordist flexible capitalism. The rigid division of labor is reduced and made more flexible. The individual work processes less repetitive in many areas. Employees are allowed to organize their work themselves to a higher degree. The rigid hierarchy of bureaucratic Fordism is replaced by more flexible forms of organization. This is oversubscribed here, ideal typically. In reality, the situation is more contradictory and complex, but I want to make clear the differences to Fordism. Employees should and may combine more fun with their work. They may and should realize themselves in it. Commitment is expected. It should be intrinsic. You can see from these formulations that this form of work organization and working attitude has a paradox. The intrinsic orientation is expected by the management. The employees ought to organize themselves. But it is clear they should do this in the sense of the organization. They should ask themselves, am I profitable here? It is a double-bind structure, as it is classically included in the formula be spontaneous. Employees take the demands on themselves and do not know if they are doing the right thing when they are following their giving meanings and when they are heteronymous. They have more freedom at work, but the danger is that they are responsible for failure in using this freedom. This is another form of alienation. No longer primarily the heteronomy and subordination as a small cog in an externally controlled transmission, but now the freedom in the context of dependence on indefinite expectations, be it from the management, be it from the anonymous market. They must subordinate themselves and their stubbornness to the constraints of the market. The concrete work is placed directly under the regimen of economization, profitability, and exchange value. This regimen is direct because valorization of labor dominates and considerations of objective work quality or professional ethics scarcely provide a shelter. At the same time, it is indirect because it has an indirect effect in retrospect, not in the process design. Whether a work proves itself becomes clear in the market, which, in the words of Friedrich August von Hayek, does not reward performance, but functions like a game. This alienation is one that constantly creates and destroys illusions of freedom that crosses the experiences of success with those of insufficiency. Now the employees are more individualized. They see themselves as less similar. Their working conditions show differences. Their working hours are not synchronous. Teamwork is not reflected in the similarity of the work, but in mediating different works communicatively. Solidarity must now, in the words of Durkheim, be organic. Currently, however, there is a fragmentation of the working relations. It results from several sources. First, it is the result of a generalized competition. Even though we find a rhetoric of teamwork everywhere, the employees are ranked in the competition of comparisons, sorted into personal portfolios. They live in a recognition culture of differentiation. Secondly, fragmentation is promoted by the flexibilization and differentiation of working conditions. While flexible working hours may have some advantages for the individual in order to better reconcile the different spheres of life, through them, however, common rhythms and rituals of the working day are dissolved. Spontaneous temporal and spatial places of encounter and communication are missing. Third, fragmentation is a result of differentiated and discontinuous employment careers. Fourth, finally, it is part of the cultural process of individualization that evokes the individual's responsibility and suggests that he should attribute himself to his own success or failure. This fragmentation impairs organic solidarity and involves dangers of enemy. But the organization of labor and the capitalist logic of exploitation make it difficult to appropriate work as meaningful. It is remarkable that employees are by no means indifferent to the meaning of their work. Unfortunately, however, sociology of work, at least in Germany, has paid little attention to the orientation of employees towards the meaning of work. In the sociology of work during Taylorism, this corresponded to the idea that this work organization must result in an indifferent and instrumental relationship of the employees to their work. This also corresponded to the way in which the alienation theory of Marx was usually understood. And it was also supposed to be a prerequisite for solidarity of employees against capital. The analysis of post-Fordist working structures, for which German sociology of work uses the term subjectivation of work, indeed focuses now on the desire of employees and the duty to employees to introduce their subjectivity into the work. This is quite different in contemporary sociology of work than in the days of Taylorism. However, the sociological papers refer only to the execution of the work. As before, the dimension of the societal meaning of the work and the product is not taken into account. Empirical studies, including the study of Stephanie Hürtgen and myself, or that one of Sarah Nies, show by contrast that employees are by no means indifferent to the benefits of their work or their social purpose. First of all, in our study about claims of employees on work, we also see that they make claims on their supervisors, their colleagues, on themselves, on the organization, and on society as a whole to enable a rational execution of the work. Supervisors should allocate the work appropriately, that is according to the competences and fair among the employees. They should create the organizational conditions of the department to work effectively, and they should represent the concerns of the department within the organization. Appropriate expectations are also directed to the organization and the enterprise altogether. This becomes clear from the widespread complaint about management mistakes, about business or temporal requirements and ratios for the work, which are factually regarded as inappropriate. These demands are important to employees because they can only work in a meaningful way if the organization creates the framework conditions for this purpose. But the interviews also made it clear that employees furthermore care about the meaning of their work for others or for society. Their work and the product or service they produce should be useful. They draw their working pride precisely from the benefit of their work or for others, from their social significance. And they criticize inefficient work organization, especially when it makes it difficult to do useful work. So there is a connection, if not an immediate identity, between meaningful work product and meaningful work execution. It is precisely use value orientation that often motivates criticism of the pressure that employees are exposed to on the business management requirements by which the work is measured. Thus, they by no means carry out the economic form determination of the activity according to which their product was exploited by capital, and thus they can remain indifferent to it. Among present forms of production, this claim to meaning often comes into direct conflict with the economization and marketization of labor and the dominance of the financial market. The importance of meaningful work also shows itself as an ex negativo. Okay. It shows itself as negativo, for then, when employees do not get meaning out of their work. With several colleagues, I recently completed a study about mental illness in the workplace, in which we conducted a series of narrative-designed in-depth interviews on the history of the disease and the interpretations of the disease by the employees who were mentally ill with depression, anxiety disorder, or burnout in connection with their work. Some work situations which are particularly psychologically straining were those in which the work was experienced as meaningless or in which moral conflicts were experienced. 3 examples may indicate what is meant. An IT employee in a large bank should check the processes in the bank's information system for a compliance with anonymity. He suffers from the fact that the entrusted team is regarded as an alibi group, and his work shows no consequences. To another employee, a representative of health and safety at work, in the daily routine it is constantly made clear that he only disturbs his company and his colleagues and that his suggestions and orders are ignored. An employee of a health insurance company cannot stand it anymore that she has to deny chronically ill patients the funding of urgently needed medicines again and again because these are the financial requirements of the department. These are some examples of the experience of a work in which no positive meaning is seen and whose execution can bring heavy health burdens. To conclude, it is particularly important to emphasize that the meaningfulness of work cannot be understood individually, because work is usually a social and cooperative process. Hardly anyone works alone. Even if he does not work directly in a team of colleagues, his work is part of a complex work process. Even the sociology of work often does not meet this essential feature of modern work, because it also deals in an individualistic manner with the question whether employees can bring their subjectivity into the work, whether they enjoy their work and can identify individually with their work. Just as sociology of work predominantly considers working orientations without reference to the dimension of societal meaning, it neglects the intersubjective dimension of the relation to work. Giving meaning is not seen as a social process. This thinking basically reflects the reification of relationships and the notion that individual work is coordinated only by the management. Of course, the management's decisional authority confirms this view on the one hand. But below this formal structure of the organization, employees experience their own cooperation, day-to-day collaboration, mutual informal support, the importance of interactive communication. However, they often experience that these cooperative elements are missing or complicated. The widespread complaints about bad working atmosphere, about competition among colleagues, support this. In these complaints, the claim to a collegiality becomes apparent, which threatens to be lost if self-realization and individual responsibility are understood as individualistic. This brings me to the term of solidarity. It seems outdated today. It does not seem to fit into a society of individualism. The culture of individualization has deepened into thinking and self-understanding. But the world of work is a world of cooperation. You can only work in a meaningful way in cooperation with others. Today, less than ever, the work process is conceivable as individual. When it is about meaningful work execution, collegiality and cooperation are always affected. Collegiality is a norm still found in such instrumentalized categories as teamwork. It is embedded in ethics of professionalism, which always address the user of the work, the customer, the clients, indeed the society. It can be instrumentalized by the logic of exploitation. Think of the team pressure, the appeal to work beyond the norm, not to leave colleagues high and dry. But on the other hand, it is also a resistance, the potential for solidarity in the fragmentation of individualized individual interests. On the one hand, this affects the work process. But the social meaning of products and services is also addressed here. It is about the relation to society, about the solidarity in the sense of Durkheim. At the same time, this touches on the issue of the good life in the sense of meaningful life. What should a society use its resources for? What quality should the work have? Which social sectors are considered important? The debates about care or about the importance of public infrastructure, which seems to be less productive under the point of view of exploitation, are addressed here. It is also about the ecological consequential of economic processes. The claim to meaningful work, therefore, also affects its societal dimension. By referring to the social use value, meaning transcends the iron cage, to use a formulation by Max Weber, of the valuation of capital. The claim to meaningful work thus raises the question of the organic solidarity of society. Thank you very much for your attention. It was a little bit long, I think.
Thank you, Stefan. That was very interesting. Do we have some questions? Yes. Obrigado, Cláudio.
Good morning. Thank you, Stefan. I had two questions for you, and I understand that it's important research. This about the meaning of the work. And I had two questions. I think the meaning and cultural dimensions. If these workers that you interview, if they had different cultures, and if the culture of the worker that they come from Turkey or German or Poland or Romania and so on, if it's appeared in your research or not. And the second is about the difference between the level in the workplace. If we have different levels, normally we have a different contour of the meaning. For a management, it's training to produce a meaning of the worker and the workers in the lines or in the front desk of the enterprise normally have another meaning of this work. Then I think if you note some difference of meaning into the same enterprise or in different levels in the enterprise, it's one question. And then the second is about the culture, the origin culture of these workers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. We interviewed what we called normal employees, that were employees who were not precarious employed, but normally, and who were had, as in Germany we say, Facharbeiter, craft workers, and middle range of white-collar workers. Not workers who did only a dirty job, and not management, and not high executive or something, but normal workers. And on the other hand, different cultures of the workers is difficult because we made this only in Germany, but we had in our sample workers for Turkish origin or something like that. But not, it was not an international comparison. We could not say if this the importance of meaningful work is different from Germany. With this, can speculate that the orientation on profession, on beruf, occupation is strong in Germany and perhaps not so strong in other countries. But this is a speculation, and it is a little dangerous to reproduce cultural prejudices. So I don't know, but it would be important to analyze this. And so I would say that the concrete meaning of the work is different depending on the places they work, but we had employees who had part of responsibility of autonomy in their work. They were not making dirty works in very simple service sector or something like that. I'm not, but as we know from other researchers, we know that the importance of the work for society, I mentioned the garbage workman, is very present also for people who are not able to self-realize themselves in their work. They say that this work must make no fun, but it is very important for the society, and that they reclaim recognition for this, that the garbage workman is not autonomous, is not respected very much, but it is a part of critique that this is not the case, because the garbage workman does a very meaningful job. So I would say you can't say that people who are not very educated or so are not interested in meaningfulness of the work, but it may be another kind of meaningfulness. It's a direct meaningfulness for the society. The dirty job is meaningful, not the meaningful self-realization in the work. So.
Thank you, Stefan, for your interesting talk. And how should I do to avoid in the middle? No? Okay. Maybe there are three aspects I would like to ask. One is related to what you say quickly in your presentation about the economic aspects. So, and I think really interesting your distinction between subjective meaning and something like an organizational meaning, something like that. So And I wonder if you couldn't add a dimension which would be the meaning of the work related to what capital defines as meaning in the valorization process. So you mentioned this point very quickly, and so you would have 3 levels, not 2, and the third one would enter in conflict, how you mentioned before, with those 2 first one, which would be related to work, and maybe the second one would be what Marx defined as the necessity for capital to organize the work in such way that it produces value for valorization. So if you take this distinction, work and capital, you found this contradiction in another way, maybe a very interesting way, I think, and you can show that in your empirical study. So maybe you can say something about that. And the second point is, I think you mentioned use value and exchange value, so the term of value. But could you say more maybe about the question of value? Because I think it's very important in what you are describing. And maybe there are opposition between different kinds of value. So the work as valued by the part or on the side of capital and on the part of the work and the workers. So, and maybe a third aspect, which is also a very Marxist one, that so you took this concept of Heiligie in a very subjective way, the alienation. No, Heiligie make that, I think, yeah. And maybe you can find it in From, I don't know. But if you take the strong version of alienation, so you have this idea that you are taken away from the object you produced, and that has something to do with the structure, so with property, with so the capitalist system. And how do you deal with this strong version of alienation? So.
Okay, 3 fundamental questions, I think. To the first one, it's I think the answer is the most easy answer. Unfortunately, in our research, we found that the critics and the claims of employees are on the organization or on their supervisors. There was no idea, and perhaps we did not, our interviews did not provocate it enough to the capitalist system or to the system of exploitation or something like that. It always was the conflict between their sense of meaningful work and what the organization wants them to do. This is the conflict which exists in different situations. But we didn't find any anti-capitalist orientation, I must say. This was a frame that is expected totally. And our interviews were orientated in a narrative way. We didn't ask for a picture of the society or something like that. We wanted to motivate them to tell stories about their work experiences and so on. Maybe this is a little bit a result of this method. So we can only speculate. Sometimes they talk about financialization in terms of that they understand that, for example, Daimler-Benz, we talked with workers from Daimler-Benz, and they talked about aspects of good cars and so, which are not realized anymore because the company has to look for a profit and something like that. But it's inside of the company, this critic. And there is the aspect of the development of the society is included there, but not very explicit. This is what I can say about that. And basically, you are right. We must have a third dimension there, but not be empirical. The second one with use value and exchange value. First of all, it depends on the kind of work they do. If you would talk to an economist to this work, there would be it would be difficult to find a clear difference like that, because the use value of his work is to optimize the profitability of the enterprise. So, if you talk to engineers, it is more easy to differentiate between the use value of the work, because they have ideas what a good car should be, and the exchange value in terms of profitability and cost reduction and something like that. So this is the first one, empirically. And perhaps I overstress this differentiation a little bit. For my intention, or for our intention, Stephanie, and my intention is to bring to light that this orientation on use value, on meaningful work, could be a basic for criticism. And this often is in the tradition of alienation theory, where employees are expected as be indifferent to their work, and this would be the way to class consciousness. We insist on another thinking, that perhaps more or less the orientation on use value is which can bring them in conflict and criticism to the capitalist system. So it may be that we overstress this differentiation a bit. And the third one, Rahel Yegi, I share your critique of Rahel Yegi's subjectivism, but I think she has one very good point, that is this change from the old problem of alienation theory, that alienation theory must go out from a real situation, from a not alienated man in the history, which is terrible, this, or in a speculative way, or an ideal way of the genus of human being and something like that. Alienation theory always has this problem, which is a reference for a not alienation situation. And if she says that we have to change from this thinking of alienation to think that the person, the human, has an alienate relation to the work situation, especially in capitalism, but not only in capitalism, because work is resistant, as de Jure says, is made difficult to work. You have to have stress, and stress is not only if it's alienated, but it's work is stressful, then it's not work. Then the critic must be, is the situation, gives the situation the possibility to appropriate this work, to overcome this alienness. It's another way of thinking. She does it more or less in a subjective way, looking up the situation of the human, of the person itself. But at the end of her book, she writes that she had to do the second part of the work, to look for the restrictions in the work, in the society, and not on the humans. And I would follow on this point.
I think that the things that I will talk are all the time talking about the similar things. So I think that the dialogue will be automatic, but I would like to ask you now if you think about a difference between work in the sense of a social relationship of domination and work in concrete sense. I think that the labor work talk about the work in the sense of social relationship of domination, in the relation of purchase and send of the work, but the labor work forget the work in this concrete sense, the things that there is in all day of work, the things that one talk with your wife when arrive at home, for example. I don't know if you think this difference, and with this, if you think that there is any possible compromise between meaningful work and capitalism in the medium term. I think that to talk about meaningful work implies to talk about any kind of compromise between meaningful work and capitalism, at least in the medium term. I don't know.
To begin with the last question, I don't know what should be a compromise. They live together in a conflictuous way. Yeah. That people try to make their work useful and meaningful, and they experience restrictions from capitalism, but not only from capitalism. It reflects the question if there is an alternative to capitalism. Stefanie Hürtgen has made a text several years ago because she was born in the German Democratic Republic. And she said that one of the reasons for the opposition to the German Democratic in the last years was that the people did not make the experience that they can work meaningful, because the organization of the society was a catastrophe. And this was a hidden aspect of critique, which from Western view it was not realized. So it's different. We have to discuss what could be an alternative to a capitalist society. We cannot only see it's only profit orientation. It could be bureaucratic the same way. And many of the aspects employees criticize today are bureaucratic forms of orientation of the society and the organization of work. For instance, in care work. The main criticism they articulate is that they have more to document than to work with patients. But this is not a critic on capitalism, or more or less indirect, it's an anti-bureaucratic critic. So normally I think people live in a capitalist society and they make their daily compromises, which are conflictuous more or less. If the engineer, for instance, wants to think about mobile systems which are comparable to ecological questions, to alternatives to our actual car production and so, this is not a critic on capitalism, but it is in conflict to organizational orientations on profitability and so. And this is a compromise. They try to do this, but they can't do this because they are employees. And so they can criticize capitalism, but not, as I said to Olivier, not fundamentally the situation. So I don't know if there's I don't think could be a compromise in a table where all problems are solved. It's a conflict situation. The first
maybe not compromise or compatibility. Maybe not compromise or compatibility.
Compatibility, perhaps sometimes, because if you go out from the term of use value, you have the situation that use value sometimes is necessary to sell things and to make profit. You have to meet use values. But it's not necessary that you meet the use value, which is a use value for the society. It can only be a use value created by marketing or something like that. This is another problem in this theory. And the first one I did not understand. I'm not sure to understand it right. Our interviews were oriented to motivate the interviewees to talk about their daily work, the problems and their claims they have on daily work, primarily. And we have a part in these interviews which was biographically. And in this biographically interview, we saw reasons for going to a specific job, to a specific profession, what they had, what they decided to, what kind of life they want. We looked for life orientations, and then you have a point on the work which is more generalized. If this work is something they like to do, not in daily situations, but in general, if it's good to their life, and there were also, which I didn't mention here, important the relation between work and other parts of the life, how important work has to be in life. And so they had another view on their work in generalized sense, if I understand you right, and on the other part,
yeah,
it was the daily situations of life. I'm not sure that I met your question.
Sorry?
I'm not sure that I met your question right.
If we can think in a difference between two senses of works, integrated but two senses of work, in the concrete sense, in this sense, and in the sense of a social relation of domination.
Domination?
Social relation of domination.
Domination. Okay.
Domination.
Okay.
So we can search meaningful work in the concrete sense, and this is not the same, maybe, is not the same that meaningful work in the sense of social relation of domination.
I have to think about, because domination is always a part of the interviews, of their thinking, but not as an issue on itself. I think it's too self-evident. There is another part of our results, which I didn't mention here, perhaps this is something to do with your question. What we saw is the self-evidence for the workers, the relation of social inequality. They are able to criticize that women don't get the same pay as men, that migrants were not equally seen as Germans. But it is very normal for them that a blue-collar worker can't expect the same as a white-collar worker, for instance. And that management is self-evident. I think this is This is a change to several decades ago, when it was self-evident that women did not have to claim the same pay as men, but it was not self-evident that workers are workers and should be workers and stay workers. This is a very interesting result, but I didn't mention here, perhaps something to do with your question.
I have also some questions. I thought the talk was very interesting. I'm wondering here about some of the categories you used, and if maybe these questions might help on the critical aspect of concept of meaningful work. On one side here, I'm thinking about the idea of solidarity between different types of work, and in the sense that you would not see industrial work as something less valued than informational work and agricultural work, and if this solidarity, this non-hierarchical relations about the meaning of these works and between the workers themselves, if this could be seen as something interesting, considering many social movements with power came about through the association of different workers or different people from different social classes that develop different works. An idea as well, I would like to problematize the idea of meaningless work. If we cannot talk about a concept of total alienation, or else we wouldn't see as alienation in the first place, can we really talk about meaningless or totally meaningless work? So this is a question. Another one is something that I was thinking when you talked about appropriation. Appropriation as a emancipatory category, but at the same time we see currently that the market has been also maybe not appropriating but expropriating social values connected to work that are not necessarily put in practice. So for example, carbon-free work, or this kind of social impact work, and that sometimes these values are used, or they are kind of expropriated from the use value, but they are put in as an ideology of this job. Then everyone has to feel happy because they are doing a socially impactful work. And if this is also, you can see also an appropriation by the system itself, or by maybe the valorization of capital, then expropriating the use value and using it as ideological way. So I'm thinking about these questions, and then later on I'll have to ask you a little bit about the method of asking them to, in your research, about storytelling and their biographical ideas. It's very interesting. And just one anecdote, when I was little, and in school, they always have to draw which kind of work you want to do. And I drew a garbage man, because I used to stay in the street, and I used to look at them, and I always saw them running. They were very strong. They were singing and happy, and I always thought that was incredible. So, but of course, then my mother started giving me lawyer books. Just an anecdote. Okay, thank you.
I do not want to point a picture of an anti-capitalist world when people think about meaningfulness of their work. It's always an interrelation with exploitation or of this thinking of use value by exchange value. This are taken for granted. It's, they are not anti-capitalist. It's not an anti-capitalist thinking. It's a anti-capitalist potential. I would say potentially anti-capitalist aspect in their thinking about the meaningfulness of work. And of course, they are thinking in the frame of a capitalist society, and it's not an alternative world. So it's clear that all this psychological duty to appropriate the work, because you have to work every day and you have to find something meaningful in this work and you have to appropriate this work, can be used ideologically. This is of course right. And so this appropriation is not an ideal way. So of course you can find some things you would say. Several years before that, I made another study about service work, and I used the concept of Irving Goffman, the framing concept, to analyze when service employees talked about their work in another way, as the sociologist would describe this work, that they describe their work sometimes as caring if they are given advice to supermarket clients. They are describing this as caring, which is of course not caring, but this is a way of them to appropriate this work and give another frame to this work, to modulate, as you would say.
Talk to the people, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. This, of course, is a psychological mechanism, and it could be a basis for ideological expropriation of this. But it shows on the other way around. It shows how important for these people is to have work which for them is meaningful. And always it could be both. It could be a consolation, or it could be a resource for criticism. So this was this question. Appropriation is ideological. Could exist meaningless work if we don't go out from alienation?
So the iron cage, you talked about possibility of transcending, but there are limits, right? But
so meaningless work. Not meaningless in the sense of not being executed in a meaningful way. This, of course, is more or less every day the case. You have done all the day you have worked and you don't know what you have reached on the end of the day. This is normal. But it could be a part of criticism, of course, against the organization and so the organization of work. Meaningless products you are working. Of course, you have some ideas about a good society or about, for instance, I had an interview with an employee of Daimler-Benz who by himself didn't drive a car because he was a member of the Green Party and he had ideas about a system of mobility which is not based on cars. It was a problem for him. I think he
the company produces cars.
The company produces cars, and the companies, and he was at the same time he was proud of the quality of these cars. But for himself, he decided that, and I think he has ideas about what could Daimler-Benz do with another form of mobility. So. But in this frame of reference, he would say that what Daimler today makes is not meaningful in this sense. So it's meaningless production. And I pointed the aspect of the engineer who is engaged in arms production, who have these situations. I think many people live in jobs which they don't think that this is meaningful. They have to do this. But this, I think they are not happy with this.
Okay. And then you tell me later about solidarity between types of work, but...
This is the point of, for me, more a perspective. I think we have to think about solidarity in a frame where it is perhaps in your sense of modulation, where you can expand your thinking whom you are near and whom you are not near. And as in a very mechanical kind of solidarity, you are near only to the people who do the same as you. But this is not possible. If it was possible sometimes, now it's not possible anymore because work is so differentiated that you have to understand and you have to modulate perhaps your reference with whom you are connected in work to other parts and other kinds of work. Sometimes this is only a comparison. For instance, when it was a slogan in strikes which were in Germany 2 or 3 years ago in the kindergarten education for the children sector. And the employees said their work is as important as the work of automobile workers. But this was it was a kind of isolation from of differentiation from the automobile workers. But they made this on the other point of view. They made this comparison, and they had they discussed about use value of society and the relation between. So it was an isolation from the automobile workers, but it was a connection to the automobile workers too. But I think this must be a kind of solidarity where you can a little bit be more abstract to the concrete work you do in the sense. But I think this solidarity can only develop if you think about use values to the society.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, do you have a question?
Hello, Stefan. Thank you for your presentation. Well, I have 2 questions. The one is I would like to ask you to clarify the difference between collegiality and solidarity in the field of work. That's your last slide. And another question, if what I would like to know what you think about, in my opinion, the question of meaning in society is always, as you said, is always a cooperative process. It's a relational process, you know. It's never an individual process. It's not just on the work, but in the family, you know. Well, that's my point.
I don't know. I have to think about the precise relation of these. Collegiality for me is, I'm looking for the sources for solidarity. That was my interest. And I think in the world of work, it's in first sense, it's collegiality. And you always hear about what people criticize on modern kind of work is the bad atmosphere at work. It's the losing of collegiality. And so they claim for collegiality. And I think against this competition in work and so on. And so I think collegiality is a norm which is easier to understand than solidarity, which is a category where many people today in Germany can't understand what it means. It's an old-fashioned work. So, but they understand collegiality. And collegiality is not easy because to develop collegiality means that you have to resist competition in work to others. And this is a nuclear form of solidarity, I would say. And solidarity in a more expressive way in society means something more, you have right. But I think it's good to, in the working world, it's good to talk about collegiality because everyone has follows this norm and has to criticize what is the reality of this. So solidarity is, I think, real solidarity must bring together different forms of work, not only the colleagues in the team or in the company, perhaps, and it's a necessity to think about what the society binds together, should bind together, but this is a more abstract thing. And okay.
Okay, Stefan. Okay, thank you very much. So we continue now with the presentation from Leonardo. Very happy that you were able to come here. Do you want to put your presentation there or no? So no, just have the text. So Leonardo is going to read the first part in English and the second part you say in Portuguese now.
Just a little introduction in Portuguese, if you could translate.
Of course. Só o seu microfone.
Eu peço duplas desculpas, primeiro por dominar muito mal o inglês e, portanto, vou falar uma parte em português. Segundo, pela parte que eu vou falar em inglês, que talvez as desculpas devem ser ainda mais intensas. Essa apresentação foi planejada inicialmente para o evento de 2015, no sentido de expor as minhas pesquisas em torno da reconstrução da fundamentação do direito fundamental ao trabalho, que é feito a partir de um duplo pilar teórico, usando, de um lado, as teorias das necessidades e, de outras, teorias do reconhecimento.
Leonardo is going then to present some ideas on a research that he's doing on the reconstruction of the fundamental right to work, and he organizes it in two perspectives. One of the necessities and another one needs approach and recognition approach.
Okay. Nessas pesquisas eu procurei investir na percepção do trabalho como valor de uso para a realização de necessidades humanas de autorrealização individual coletiva, construção da identidade, conquista da saúde, formação de vínculos de solidariedade e mesmo para a apresentação, para o desenvolvimento do aprendizado ético e o aprendizado político de participação na vida da cidade, inclusive presente em toda a situação do trabalho. Aqui no sentido de trabalho da cultura, ou na expressão alemã, Kulturarbeit.
Okay, so he's looking at the perspective of work as use value, as work that is essential to self-determination, self-fulfillment, to identity, to learning processes, and also to the ethical formation and the political participation in the cities.
Bom, a partir dos estudos em psicodinâmica do trabalho, sobretudo da obra de Christophe Dejoux, procurei trabalhar como uma série de condições relativas à organização do trabalho, sobretudo a organização do trabalho concreto, vinculadas às possibilidades de práticas de cooperação, de reconhecimento e de deliberação coletiva, bem como relativas ao sentido público do trabalho, são determinantes para que o trabalho possa servir como um mediador da subjetividade, e isso tem impactos importantes sobre a esfera social e a esfera política.
So he's basing his ideas also in the psychodynamics of work, especially in Christophe de Jour's works. And this perspective tries to join the perspective of the organizational aspect of work with the elements of cooperation, recognition, and public deliberation that enables the construction of a work that is that constructs the subject, or that is able to construct the idea of subjectivity connected to work.
Bom, com esse esforço de reconstrução da fundamentação do direito ao trabalho, com apoio não só nos elementos normativos positivados, mas neste diálogo transdisciplinar entre direito e outros saberes que permitem dizer a respeito das condições concretas de um trabalho digno, que é constitucionalmente assegurado, e sobretudo a partir de pesquisas clínicas, de práticas intersubjetivas reais de trabalho, isso levou à elaboração de um conceito jurídico de um direito fundamental ao conteúdo do próprio trabalho, como núcleo de sentido do direito fundamental ao trabalho, envolvendo as condições da atividade e da organização do trabalho.
So his work makes an effort to reconstruct not only the normative and positive norms and legal aspects of work, but in this transdisciplinary interaction that considers the real intersubject practices of clinic research, clinical research, that so not only the legal aspects, but also these real intersubjective practices of clinical research that led him to the idea of reconstructing a fundamental right to work, the concept of a fundamental right to the content of the work, to the content of the work.
The content of the own work.
The own work, yeah, the content of the own work as a center of this protection of this concept of work. Yeah. Or is also then a fundamental human right to work, which is multidimensional.
Yeah. Maybe we can talk about a dialogue with the other science to get meaningful law.
Yes. From meaningful work to meaningful law.
Yeah.
Meaningful labor law.
Bom, o que houve aqui de 2015 para cá a gente conseguiu concluir e está em fase final de revisão do relatório para publicação de pesquisas qualitativas que nós realizamos na Justiça do Trabalho no Paraná, destinadas justamente a compreender, a partir desse referencial teórico, os impactos da introdução no Poder Judiciário brasileiro de uma série de dispositivos de gestão do trabalho, especialmente de avaliação do trabalho de juízes do trabalho e servidores. Ou seja, estamos falando aqui do trabalho dos juízes da Justiça do Trabalho, né? Então, em virtude disso, eu optei, conversando com o Vitor, de restringir o que seria a exposição da primeira parte. Vou fazer poucos acréscimos em relação ao que está no resumo expandido que foi enviado, para, na segunda parte, poder fazer o relato dessa pesquisa. Então, nós temos duas partes aqui. A primeira parte eu vou ler em inglês e a segunda parte o Vitor volta a traduzir.
So he's going to present the conclusions of this qualitative research, which he was doing in 2015, and now he is preparing the reports and the publications. and has to do directly with the introduction of new dispositives, or we can say our new dispositives in labor law justice, especially concerning the administration of the judges' work and also the assistants and the other workers of the labor law justice.
So the first part is degradation of the conditions of the cooperation, recognition, and collective deliberation as violations of the fundamental right to work. And this part is intended to discuss current forms of degradation of the conditions of cooperation, recognition, and collective deliberation at work as violations to the fundamental right to work. We start up from a reconstruction of these fundamental rights under the light of a couple of theoretical background, obtained on the one hand the theories of needs, and the other the theories that think the issue of recognition at work, especially the psychodynamics of work by Christophe Dejoux. With this approach, we intend to analyze the degradation of organizational conditions of work promoted by the managerial turn of recent decades, and how it is also impacts on public space. It is proposed that the category needs to be rescued as an intermediate link of reasoning rights, which allows us to approximate in terms of a greater degree of concreteness the distance of necessary mediations between fundamental rights and their link with human dignity. From the conceptual framework of reproductive rationality of subject by Franz Henke-Lammert, that is a German philosopher and economist, and now living in Costa Rica. Needs determine the normative range of variation limits of the valid policy options, and they connect the content of the most of the basic rights, not all the basic rights, but the most of the basic rights to the reality of subjects' concrete life. The fulfillment of needs is a necessary, even not sufficient material and historic justification of any normative system globally considered. This fundament is founded in an objective sense of needs, and that pretends to be universal and conditions without which there is a serious and permanent damage to the independent and critical participation in a collective form of life. I use in this the British authors, Len Doyle and Ian Gauth. But it is also a conception that allows one to normatively criticize any form of life that overflows the boundaries of feasibility fixed from the needs satisfaction. That must necessarily, but not sufficiently, be present at the justification of the rights as a whole, and especially of most of specific basic rights, like the right to work, that has an intense connection with human needs. Work establishes 4 forms of relation with needs. The work itself is a need. The human cannot be fulfilled without working, in the meaning of act always in an intersubjective way. His specific human activity of expressing and transforming the world by turning in human the nature and himself. The second, the work always seen as a collective process and inserted in the social division of work, also produce goods that satisfy needs, material and immaterial goods. third, through work, at the end of social division of work, the human beings update and create new needs. Now we can talk about in the most societies the need of internet, the access to internet like a need. But the point is the fourth. If work is a need, in the sense of A, the first, at the same time, the work as an entirety of activities and relationships also consists in a good and use-value that directly satisfies needs of self-realization and corporality development, of affirmation of identity, of health achievement, of learning to live together. Works always not just produce, is always live together. And of construction of solidarity and belonging bonds. This implies that work must have conditions of durability, intensity, accidental and sanitary safety, and especially concrete content of the activity of the work and collective organization, able to allow the work be a mediation for workers, both individually and collectively considered, by the possibility of self-realization and personality development, of maintaining cooperation bonds, by the possibility to participate of the control of the work process content, by the deontic experience of the construction of technical and ethical, formal and informal roles of work, by the consolidating and developing of identity and self-esteem, by the opportunity to the recognition of the singular contribution brought by the realized work, and by the privileged learning of living together and participating of communal work, of a community of work, and honoring life through work. We live in a society model where, for a great part of the population, the labor relation is the only one, or at least the main way to gain the essential goods, without which one cannot talk about life with dignity. But, as it has been already said, work is not only an instrumental way to gain other goods. Above all, human work itself, it's a good with use value. The content of the work activity and the collective work organization as an entirety of activities and relationships is a good that fulfills essential human needs. These two aspects, platform of access to goods and directly satisfier of human needs, that give the right to work its material fundamentality in the legal system. In this point, the theme of the struggle for recognition in the illuminated perspective, not only by the social theory, but also by the clinical science of work, especially the psychodynamics of work, comes up. Me ajuda aqui. Seria interessante alternar entre a perspectiva de um sistema de produção, distribuição e transformação e a perspectiva dos sujeitos. Nesse sentido, os sujeitos não são meros destinatários de bens materiais e simbólicos, mas são sujeitos de processos de luta social que também são lutas de autoconstituição intersubjetiva. Portanto, reconhecimento é também reconhecimento do sujeito em sua particularidade e singularidade de sujeito de necessidades.
Mm-hmm. So it's relevant to alternate between the perspective of the production system, distribution and transformation with the perspective of the subjects. The subjects are not mere receivers of the material and symbolic goods, but are subjects in the process of social struggle and also struggles for the intersubjective self-constitution. And in this sense, recognition is also the recognition of the subject in his particularity and singularities as a subject of needs.
In the sense of Shakespeare, in Shylock, like apologize to Shakespeare. You take my life when you do take the means whereby I live. Okay. To psychodynamics of work, work is much more than doing ordered tasks. It is shown from the studies in ergonomics how there is an unsurmountable distance between the prescribed order of work and the effective order of work. Work is therefore defined as what must be added individually and collectively by the subjects to the prescribed order of work, often assuming risks of not complying with the prescriptions, mobilizing all their capacities and persisting to account for the resistance of the real and the variability of the work situation so that the work objectives can be achieved. Work is always working with others, with the means of work, and on oneself. Work is always work on oneself. It is clear that this attempt to master the real of work is constantly frustrated. Thus, the way the real is made known to the subjects is at first a painful experience of affection in the face of the failure. Suffering is the inherent pathetical experience of work. Suffering is not bad in yourself. Working is always suffering. But suffering always demands a transformation. What induces people to devote themselves to work, facing the obstacles and assuming risks, is the possibility of recognizing themselves and being recognized as worth people who belong to a work community and leave marks of their singular contribution on it by doing a well-done work and participating of a work community. This depends on the other side, at the form of a judgment of material and symbolic recognition of the contribution brought by work. Conditions related to the activity and to work organization are necessary because recognition is only possible if there is a working community in which the contribution recognition dynamic is possible. Those conditions are related to the possibility of cooperation between the workers, visibility of the work, trust, liberty and available time to talk and list, so that an informal participatory deliberative practice of construction of agreements, norms, technical and ethical rules, and arbitration of disputes at work. To work is largely to institute formal and informal rules that are always at the same time technical and ethical rules, mobilizing not only strategic instrumental rationality, but also other rationalities, practical, axiological, and communicative. By means of rules, agreements, and arbitration of conflict, the prescribed order of work is readjusted cooperatively and over time will constitute a professional ethos. This is what the Jurs calls la déontique du faire, déontique of doing. It is true that most existing works do not meet these requirements. Despite this, The research of work clinical science show that work, in a concrete way, is never neutral regarding mental health, and also has a fundamental role to the sociability and the political learning. The material and existential precariousness of most actual work experience do not allow us to eliminate these hypotheses. It may cause the worst in terms of oppression, alienation, exploitation, subject degradation, illness, accidents, and the production of an alienated subjectivity that produces a cynical rationality that destroys the solidarity bonds and undermines the public action. Indeed, this is the effective result of most of the actual work experience. But work is also a privileged intermediary for the best in terms of personality development, identity construction, and achievement of health, construction of solidarity and belonging bonds, and of ethic and political learning. Work is the great privileged intermediary of ego's fulfillment at the social space, and which allows to rearrange the failures of the constitution of the identity in the erotic sphere. Its degradation does not prove it is not needed, but reveals the urgency of those conditions redemption in the normative sense. Making the work relations more precarious, which is increased by the neoliberalism and the managerial turn, not only affects the conditions of workforce purchase and sale, but the existential conditions themselves. It is making more precarious the human being itself and destroying the conditions for public action. What I have tried to do from this point of view has been to translate these requirements of necessary conditions related to the activity and organization of labor into the scope of protection of the right to work. This has become a concept of a fundamental right to the content of one's own work, including the conditions of work activity and organization as the central dimension of a right to work that has multiple normative dimensions. To work in a contractual relationship is not only to fulfill the obligation contracted, to discharge the obligation contracted with the employer, but in the same act to exercise a basic right. It is not a matter of suppressing the right of the employer in juridic terms, in legal terms. It is not a matter of suppressing the right of employer to organize production, but of rescuing the tension that exists there between property rights and free enterprise, with the right to work and the other rights related to it. This concept begins repercussão, começa a haver uma certa repercussão desse conceito na jurisprudência, embora com referências um tanto genéricas, em decisões, por exemplo, para discutir a legalidade de situações de terceirização, outsourcing, trabalhadores que ficam recebendo o seu salário, mas sem trabalhar, sem um objeto de trabalho. Também um certo impacto acadêmico interessante, já contabilizo várias dissertações e teses que têm dialogado com esse conceito. Mas o que eu queria mencionar é que foi especificamente no âmbito do Human Rights Council, da United Nations, que houve o avanço mais importante aí, porque eu tive a oportunidade de participar da elaboração de um report que foi apresentado pelo Alto Comissariado em Direitos Humanos da ONU e que foi oficializado como doutrina do Human Rights Council agora em 2016, E esse report faz um mapeamento das diversas dimensões normativas do direito ao trabalho, incluindo essa específica referência ao conceito de um direito fundamental ao conteúdo do próprio trabalho.
Okay, so this concept has had an impact in decision spheres, so in the jurisprudence, adjudication processes, even though it is somewhat generic, and it works as, in some sense, to discuss the legality of situations of outsourcing, and also workers that stay without attributions inside of work. So, então, pouco da coisa que você fica, as pessoas não dão trabalho, você
O placar.
Como a gente chama aqui? Né?
O placar na geladeira.
Isso, put in the fridge, like the workers that...
Mise au placard, em francês.
Yeah, the workers that are employed, but they don't receive tasks, so they have to stay there without jobs to do.
Receive the wage.
Without tax.
Yeah.
As
Aspone.
No, it's like the line of...
Posto no aquário. Em francês, mise au placard.
Mas o placar.
Another way. Some industries, when
Thank you. I think in another way. I think when we have a economic crisis and industry put a part of the workers at home receiving salaries without work. It's necessary because sometimes these workers are too specific, they are training for special tasks, and it's not economical. The economic interest of the enterprise or is maintain these workers without working because they don't have work to them. But
I think this case is different. This is the case where you just...
It's a little bit different.
Okay.
Like
you don't know why you don't have tasking.
So this concept, this multi-dimensional concept of the right to work has also had an academic impact. So many theses and dissertations have, some diverse theses and dissertations have been using this concept, but it is important to stress that the most important impact is that Leonardo himself had the chance to participate in a meeting with the Human Rights Council and a report, produced a report in the Human Rights Council requested by the High Commission of the United Nations that officialized as a doctrine of the Human Rights Council in March 2016. And in this report, he has made a mapping of the values and the normative principles in the multiple dimensions of the right to work, including this concept of the fundamental right to the contents of one's own work.
This report has not my name. It's written in United Nations language. And there is in 6 languages in internet, but it's interesting because it has received like an official concept from the human rights doctrine. This concept, I would like to read. The right to work includes basic requirements of qualitative content of the activity, which should not be meaningless or excessively repetitive or exhausting. Workplace conditions that enhance self-realization include respect for the fundamental political and economic freedoms of the individual, the possibility of cooperation and dialogue between works and with the organization's management, recognition of the workers' contribution, career prospects, and professional development, the promotion of the physical and mental health of the worker, respect for individuality and morality, the absence of discrimination and sexual and moral harassment, and respect. It is the duty of the state to implement and protect this right and to enforce the duty of employers to respect it. I think that is uma boa ferramenta jurídica.
Tool.
A good juridic tool. So, a partir disso, vamos à segunda parte em que eu vou falar então da pesquisa que nós fizemos no âmbito do Poder Judiciário do Trabalho no Paraná, sobre os impactos dos mecanismos de avaliação do trabalho judicial na subjetividade e saúde psíquica de magistrados e servidores.
Okay, so now he's going to begin the part of the results of the research and the impacts of assessment in judicial, the labor justice work, and the impacts in the subjectivity and the psychic health of judges and other public agents, public servants.
Bom, essa síntese que eu vou apresentar, ela está muito aquém da enorme complexidade, da riqueza que aflorou nessa pesquisa e nos diversos aspectos que são discutidos no relatório integral. Eu fiz uma síntese de 50 páginas, depois uma síntese de 30, uma síntese de 20 e vou apresentar aqui uma síntese de umas 15 e que não sei, e que provavelmente eu vou ter que enxugar durante a fala.
Okay. He's making a great synthesis of many results he has.
Bom, essa pesquisa de campo ocorreu nos anos 2014 e 2015, foi financiada pela Escola Judicial do próprio TRT. O grupo de pesquisadores era integrado por 4 magistrados e 7 servidores, inicialmente. E depois da delimitação do escopo da pesquisa, no processo inicial, também foi contratado um professor da USP, o professor Lert da Schnelver, que é da Politécnica, que estuda ergonomia, que atuou como supervisor da pesquisa e também como mediador dos grupos focais.
So the research was held in 2014, 2015. Had financial support from the Judicial School of the Regional Court of Labor Law, Regional Court of Labor, and the first group that were interviewed were 4 judges and 7 assistants and other workers of the labor court. And after then limiting the scope of the research and the empirical aspect made by the group, the Professor Laerti Schnelvar, who works with ergonomics, also helped as mediator of the focus groups.
Só alguns aspectos metodológicos. Primeiro, é interessante que se trata de uma pesquisa participante, ou seja, todos os integrantes da pesquisa eram juízes e servidores, integrantes do quadro do TRT, assim como os participantes, os entrevistados, os participantes dos grupos focais, de modo que todos integravam o próprio universo pesquisado, né, na perspectiva de transformar a sua própria realidade por meio da pesquisa.
Okay, so the idea was to have as method participative research. So the magistrates, so the judges and the other workers themselves collected the data and participated. Is this right? Eles coletaram os dados.
Not the same people, but All people were judges and funcionários, servidores, public workers from the tribunal, and os entrevistados,
interviewees,
the interviewers and the other participants all were judges and public workers from the tribunal. Compartilha-se aqui a ideia de que somente a partir do sentido expressado pelos próprios sujeitos que vivenciam o trabalho é que se pode ter algum acesso que permita uma análise objetivadora da subjetividade.
With this method, he's putting forward the idea that only the meaning given by their own subjects that live and work in this type of work, can we have access to a more objective aspect of subjectivity?
Bom, é uma modalidade de pesquisação que preconiza essa interação entre pesquisa e transformação da própria realidade, embora limitada por um período, muito embora essa pesquisa continue surtindo uma série de efeitos institucionais.
Okay, so it's a kind of action research that involves this interaction between practice and investigation, that even though limited in one scope, one empirical group, it has made impacts in the court as well.
Nós fizemos uma série de pesquisas preparatórias e formação do grupo, e a partir daí fizemos durante um ano o planejamento, a elaboração e a realização das pesquisas individuais que foram conduzidas por pelo menos um psicólogo do próprio tribunal que conduziu as entrevistas. Ao todo foram entrevistados 8 magistrados, 9 servidores, em entrevistas longas de várias horas. Houve a validação dos relatórios de síntese em 2014.
So, in the first year, there were individual and semi-structured interviews with 8 judges and 9 public workers. And then in the second year, they had focus groups with discussions in order to enhance the results. Is this right? Sorry.
Yeah. Então, em 2015, se usou a metodologia de grupo focal, o que foge um pouco da metodologia canônica da psicodinâmica do trabalho, porque a gente introduziu um viés de discussão no grupo, né, e havia um prazo delimitado, né, mas se manteve, fora isso, os cânones gerais da pesquisa em psicodinâmica do trabalho, envolvendo a necessidade de uma demanda do próprio grupo pesquisado, o caráter voluntário da adesão, a livre circulação da palavra, a presença de mediadores capacitados em psicodinâmica do trabalho, na discussão de grupo e a validação pelos próprios participantes.
So they used this active or action research is a little different from the classical perspective of work psychodynamics, but they maintained some of the elements of these researches, of this kind of research, which is having the claim or the request by the group that will be subject of this research, has to have voluntary participation, and in the discussions there has to be a free circulation of words and of the expressions of the workers. So they also have, the idea is also to have capacitated mediators, and this free circulation of the word also results then in the validation by the participants themselves in relation to the results.
Eu já falei da fundamentação teórica já foi essencialmente exposta na primeira parte, a questão fundamental da pesquisa é tentar compreender como o trabalho da justiça, como esse elemento central na vida dos magistrados e servidores, e situado num contexto de opções organizacionais, e aqui mais especificamente as opções relativas aos mecanismos de avaliação, como isso afeta a subjetividade e a saúde com reflexos na prestação jurisdicional.
So the idea is that what are the impacts of these organizational options that that specifically developed in assessment mechanisms? How these organizational options affect the subjectivity and the health, and with the impacts in the legal adjudication itself.
Para a psicodinâmica do trabalho, trabalhar é sempre mobilizar as suas capacidades para enfrentar as dificuldades do trabalho real e suprir as deficiências da ordem prescrita. E por isso a avaliação dos resultados do trabalho, no mais das vezes, passa longe do trabalho efetivo que foi necessário para alcançar aqueles resultados.
So psychodynamics of work has the idea that working is mobilizing the capacities to face difficulties of the real work and to suprir is to result or to fulfill the prescribed order, and many times the assessment of the results of the work go beyond the effective work that was necessary to reach these. Explica pouquinho como que seria isso. So the worker thinks that he works more than the evaluation, or he assesses it better, or
work is very discrete. It's too hard to evaluate work, the effective work. And so we maybe can measure the result of the work, but this is not the work. And we must to judge, to make a judgment of a qualitative judgment of the work, to evaluate the work. Quando as pessoas fazem tudo aquilo que foi prescrito e só aquilo que foi prescrito, a produção para. Isso é o que se conhece por grève du zèle, ou operação padrão, né? E isto vale tanto para uma linha de produção taylorista quanto para um serviço público como o judiciário.
So when the workers do exactly what is prescribed, production itself stops. It's what in French they say. What?
Grève du zèle.
Grève du zèle.
Grève de zelo.
Grève de zelo. So, or pattern operation, or standard operation. This applies both to tailorist industrial production as well as public service like the judiciary.
Eu vou passando aqui, vamos falar um pouquinho dos resultados. Os resultados vão no sentido de que mesmo um trabalho aparentemente tão cheio de sentidos como o trabalho judicial, e que é relativamente bem remunerado, evidentemente que eu gostaria de ganhar um pouco mais, pode ser altamente degradado pelas opções organizacionais. E é isso que vem ocorrendo.
So it's one of the results that is starting to present the results is that a work that is so full of meanings, such as judicial work, and which is relatively well paid, can be highly degraded by organizational options and this is what has been occurring in this field of labor law and justice.
O principal elemento estruturante do discurso dos magistrados é a sua relação com o ethos profissional, que consiste num conjunto de tradições, de princípios, de valores, de regras que não são só técnicas, mas éticas também. Trabalhar não é só produzir, mas viver juntos, e que envolve modos de cooperação, a valorização daquilo que é bem feito e que é útil socialmente. Em parte, esses padrões são escritos, mas em grande parte são padrões informais e mesmo tácitos, ou até não conscientes, que numa profissão estável, como é a magistratura, vão se condensando ao longo do tempo e são compartilhados pelos integrantes da profissão. É o ethos que regula e dá sentido à profissão dentro da vida social, serve de suporte a cada ação de trabalho em situações singulares e promove a construção identitária.
So, especially the judges, the evaluation, the assessment they have of their work has to do with the professional ethos, which is not only made by traditions, principles, rules and values, but also techniques and ethical practices, because working is not only producing, but is living together. So means of cooperation and valorization of what is useful socially. So written or not, these patterns and these values and conscience, whether they are conscious or not, they are shared by the workers, and then it creates this ethos that gives meaning and to the profession within the social life, and gives support to each action in the work and the specific situations, leading to identitary construction of identity.
Apropriar-se do ethos profissional custa caro, exige esforço, exige tempo, às vezes exige toda uma vida.
So appropriating of professional ethos is not something that is just given. You just don't have to be nominated or something like that. It takes efforts. It takes a learning process that sometimes it takes a whole life for you to really appropriate yourself from the professional ethos.
O que nós constatamos é que os juízes continuam substancialmente vinculados ao ethos profissional, mas há sinais muito fortes de desmobilização e de cinismo adaptativo se avolumando e que pode se derivar num processo de degradação da vivência dos valores da profissão, com grandes riscos para a saúde e para a qualidade da prestação jurisdicional.
So they have found that judges still continue to be attached to the normative meaning of the professional ethos, even though there are intense signs of demobilization or less dynamics or demobilization or adaptative cynicism that have been growing and can lead to a process of degradation of living the values of the profession and creating risks for health and also the quality of the adjudication.
Se for para resumir numa frase, se pode dizer que é crescente a angústia dos magistrados em perceberem que podem estar se distanciando do que eles consideram ser o sentido ético do trabalho judicial bem feito, para alcançar resultados numéricos que não são vistos como a realização dos valores da justiça. Isso induz a um sofrimento ético que vai se avolumando, acumulando e exigindo práticas adaptativas.
So in one sentence, they have found a growing anguish from these magistrates, and they realize that they have been growing distant from what they consider the ethical meaning of the well-done judicial work. And in order to achieve numerical results, as something different from the ethical meaning of the work. This leads to suffering, ethical suffering, that has been growing and demands adaptative practices.
O sofrimento ético tem por característica algo que não pode ser transformado em prazer.
Ethical suffering has characteristics that cannot be transformed into pleasure.
É interessante que há um vínculo entre saúde psíquica, qualidade, eficiência e efetividade da atuação do Poder Judiciário. Ao contrário do que pensam os gestores, o que é bom para a saúde das pessoas e da organização também é bom para a jurisdição. Aqui, 2 parágrafos abaixo.
Os juízes percebem a distância.
Vai para cima.
Okay, so they have found a link between the physical health with the quality, the efficiency, and the effectivity of the practices of the judiciary in the labor courts. On the contrary, on the contrary of many administrators of what they think, which is good for the health of people and the organization, is also good for jurisdiction. So there's a link between health, psychic health, quality and effectivity of the work. So this is good for the health of the people and also for the jurisdiction, differently from what the administrators think.
Nós temos a mesma sensação que Stefan mencionou, de que é uma pretensão dos trabalhadores poder fazer um bom trabalho. E o que eles relatam é a percepção de que a organização do trabalho imposta pela empresa ou pela organização impede fazer-se um bom trabalho. A gente tem um pouco a noção de que isso é o inverso, de que a empresa quer que o bom trabalho seja feito e os trabalhadores é que não querem fazer esse bom trabalho. Mas o que a gente percebe nas entrevistas é o contrário.
So, similarly to what Stefan had said, we have the feeling that that they want to do a good job, that they are able to do a good job, but the organization techniques that are imposed stops them, prohibits them from doing this good job, this meaningful job, and this is the sheer opposite of an idea that actually the company wants them to do a good job and that they cannot do a good job. So it's differently from what they think.
Resolver repetidamente grandes quantidades de processos que não produzem repercussão sobre as práticas sociais dá ao juiz a sensação de enxugar gelo. E isso induz ao esvaziamento do sentido do trabalho para o juiz, pois a atuação é percebida como inócua perante a realidade social. E isso é altamente desestabilizador para o magistrado, perder a crença na utilidade do seu trabalho.
So the judges feel that they are drying ice, especially because they have to solve repetitive tasks, many number of processes, procedures and legal procedures with low repercussion on the social practices, and this leads to a void of the meaning of the work for the judge. So his work, his activity is perceived as without impact to the social reality.
Se o trabalho, por mais que ele custe, é considerado inútil, fica bloqueada a via sublimatória que permite transformar o sofrimento em prazer. E a identidade se fragiliza e o sofrimento ordinário ao trabalho se torna patogênico.
So if work, even though with the greatest effort, is considered unuseful, the sublimatory channel is blocked. This channel that allows one to transform suffering into pleasure is blocked, and identity itself becomes frail and becomes also pathogenic.
Aquilo que hoje se avalia em relação ao trabalho dos magistrados, para fim de avaliação individual e para fim de alocação de recursos dos tribunais, não é sequer o resultado do trabalho, o que é pouco, mas exclusivamente a quantidade e a velocidade de atos realizados. Não se avalia nem a qualidade da justiça singular, nem o impacto de transformação da realidade das decisões proferidas.
So what is actually valued by these new procedures is not even the result of the work, but exclusively the quantity and the speed that they can perform certain actions. So these measures do not assess the quality of the adjudications of the rulings themselves, and not even the social impact, the transformative impact of their decisions.
Diante disso, alguns decidem não mais buscar as formas de progressão na carreira, o que alivia a pressão competitiva. Mas outros procuram jogar com as regras, focando nos indicadores objetivos. O dilema aí figura entre optar pela qualidade de vida no trabalho, pelos valores éticos da profissão e pelo compromisso com a efetividade, renunciando aos mecanismos institucionais de reconhecimento e de progressão na carreira, ou, do outro lado, aderir aos padrões numéricos do jogo, correndo o risco de perder o acesso a se ver reconhecido pelo trabalho bem feito.
So this process of losing the meaning and the usefulness and the meaning of the work makes these workers adapt in a way of playing with the rules. Like it seems like playing with the rules of the game. So there's a dilemma here between choosing the quality of life in work and through the ethical values of the profession and the commitment with effectivity, renouncing on the other side the institutional mechanisms of recognition and progression in the career, or on the other side just having to accept the patterns or the standard numbers of the game, or else they'll just lose risk, or they'll have the fall on the risks of losing access and not being recognized by well done work.
Quando se colocam todos para competir entre si por recursos limitados e pelas vagas nas escassas oportunidades de progressão funcional, corroem-se as bases da cooperação e da solidariedade. Produz-se uma tendência cada vez maior à individualização, ao desinteresse com o trabalho do colega e com o sentido comum da organização. E isto resulta em ineficiência.
So when they are put to compete amongst themselves for limited resources and scarce possibilities of promotion, the basis of cooperation and solidarity begin to ruin. So we have a tendency to more individualization, lack of interest in the work of the colleagues, and the common meaning of the organization. This leads to a brutal inefficiency.
Sem cooperação, não há mobilização subjetiva, não há diálogo sobre o trabalho real, não há eficiência nem efetividade. Sem cooperação, não há solidariedade nem saúde no trabalho. Surgem sintomas, também mencionados pelos entrevistados, como o uso disseminado de drogas psicoativas entre magistrados, abuso de álcool, casos de depressão, inclusive casos de suicídio que não está mencionado aqui porque não foram especificamente estudados, não decorrem na nossa pesquisa, mas fora se tem casos de suicídio, são efeitos desse processo.
So the effects of this process is that without cooperation there is no subjective mobilization, no dialogue about real work, there's no efficiency or no efficiency or effectivity. Without cooperation there's no solidarity and nor health in work. And then we have symptoms as a result, such as depression, a disseminated use of drugs, alcohol, and as he also mentions, cases of suicide that were not mentioned in the study, but they know that have been occurring as well, cases of suicide.
In other states,
In other states, not in Paraná.
Numa das falas individuais, um magistrado antigo diz que deixou de ser juiz no momento em que se passou a priorizar a quantidade sobre a qualidade. E, ao mesmo tempo, ele relata o prazer que há muito tempo não sentia quando ele se permitiu dedicar muitas horas na elaboração de uma decisão difícil, com grande impacto social e que ele considera que resultou num bom trabalho, ainda que isso tenha atrasado os outros processos.
So, in one of the individual interviews, older and a judge that had been a long time in this position said, quote, he stopped being a judge in the moment he started to prioritize the quantity over quality. And at the same time, he states that he had a great pleasure that he didn't have in a long time because he dedicated many hours to producing a decision that had great social impact, but limited his time or resulted in a good work, but at the same time made some delay in some of his processes.
A pressão por se adaptar é grande, se apresenta como um dilema. Por exemplo, no relato que diz: como eu vou me olhar no espelho com a frustração de que fiz tudo certo, julgando segundo a própria consciência, e fui ultrapassado pelo outro, que abriu as portas para aderir a tudo. Adianta eu brigar com essa regra? Se isso só vai me trazer prejuízo, eu vou me adaptar, mas eu acho que é prejudicial.
So one of the sentences as well, they said, quote, how am I going to look in the mirror with the frustration that I have done everything right, I've judged with my own conscience, but I've been overruled or surpassed by another who opened his doors to abide by everything. Is it worth, or does it have a result for me to struggle with this rule if it only will bring me damages? So I'm going to adapt, even though I know it's bad for me.
O risco identificado aí é o da própria reificação dos magistrados. Se diz: é muito ruim ser avaliado por números. A gente vira um número também. Uma vez que não podendo fazer do trabalho algo seu, em termos de fazer-se parte do trabalho da justiça, para dar conta de atingir os índices estatísticos, desaparece o papel do sujeito no processo, que se torna apenas uma peça, um número também.
So there's a clear process of reification here. And when one of the judges says, quote, it's very bad to be assessed by numbers. We become a number too. Close quotation. Once a judge doesn't do or cannot do a work that he can see as his or hers, in terms of being part of this work of justice, in order to fulfill rankings, the role of the subject in the process disappears. He becomes only just a piece in a peça, or just a number two, as they say.
Veja, o foco da atenção do trabalho do juiz deixa de estar no receio de cometer uma injustiça para estar em não atingir as metas numéricas.
So his focus is not anymore on producing or promoting justice, but or his fear is not promoting injustice, but also not fulfilling the numerical standards.
As formas de avaliação e alocação de recursos atualmente utilizadas, baseadas em estatísticas de atos processuais, produzem consequências importantes sobre as condutas no trabalho e sobre a subjetividade. Nas palavras de um dos participantes da pesquisa, para mim esse é o grande problema. Fazer um monte de sentenças meia boca, isso me fere, isso mata algo dentro de mim. Romper com o sentido de um bom trabalho nessa dupla dimensão, interna e externa ao processo, quando já se investiu os recursos subjetivos de uma vida inteira na apropriação de uma profissão, significa um grave risco para a liberdade e para a saúde psíquica e mesmo somática. Trair os valores da profissão, que se lutou tanto para conquistar, é trair a si mesmo. E é muito custoso do ponto de vista psíquico. Isso produz uma espécie de sofrimento que em psicodinâmica do trabalho se denomina sofrimento ético, que, como eu mencionei, não é passível de transformação em prazer.
So the assessment forms, the idea of resource allocation that are presently used, based in statistics of procedures, have important consequences in the actions in work, and also in the subjectivity of these people, of these persons. One of the participants' own words, I quote, "For me, that's the big problem, making many so-so sentences that is damaging for me, that hurts me, that kills something inside me." End quote. So this is the idea. This idea of stopping, of the rupture in doing a good job, internally and externally. Now, when you invested many subjective resources, it has a great risk for freedom and psychic health, even somatic health. The values of the profession that you fought so much to conquer, being transformed, makes you betray yourself, and it's very costly psychically, in psychic terms. This is what in the psychodynamics of work they call it ethical suffering, which, as he says, cannot transform the suffering into pleasure.
Isso leva os juízes a desenvolverem estratégias individuais e coletivas de defesa que vão distanciá-los cada vez mais do sentido ético do seu trabalho e de si mesmos. Os pontos extremos desse processo são o cinismo adaptativo ou a descompensação psicopatológica quando as defesas falham.
So this may lead the judges to develop individual and collective strategies of defense that will make them more distant to the ethical meaning of their job and of themselves. So the extreme results of these processes are adaptative cynicism and psychopathological decompensation.
When the defenses fail.
When the defenses fail.
A pesquisa revela, então, que os juízes cada vez mais têm adotado inúmeras práticas de fraude relacionadas à manipulação estatística, mas também relacionadas ao próprio julgamento do mérito das ações como consequência disso. Não está escrito, então.
Sobre o mérito das ações, né?
O juiz tem adotado inúmeras práticas, relatam-se práticas de inúmeras fraudes com objetivos de atingir a estatística, mas também, inclusive, afetando o próprio mérito do julgamento das ações.
So many irregular activities and fraud would be like fraud. How do you translate fraud?
No.
Fraud.
Fraud.
Okay, yes, frauds are made in order to reach the statistics, the statistic results, and this has been proven to affect the content itself of the judicial decisions.
Mas fala-se mesmo de juízes que analisam o processo de forma muito superficial e julgam a ação improcedente por ser mais fácil. Fala-se de juízes que julgam os processos improcedentes porque depois não há necessidade do processo de execução, que dá muito trabalho.
So judges sometimes they judge that improcedente would be
Denied.
denied. They denied the request because it's easier, or they just deny the because then you won't have to go through another process, which is to execute the sentence.
A prática de tribunais que extinguem processos que estão arquivados, mas que estão ativos, que a gente chama de prescrição intercorrente dos processos em execução, porque isto aumenta a sua eficiência e com isso aumenta o seu orçamento.
So the rulings that are judged extinct, but because of agora prescrição intercorrente, né, que são julgados.
Prescription.
Yeah. Yeah. They extinguish some of the lawsuits that the execution processes because of prescription, or because they pass the time, and this leads to an idea that you have greater statistics number, but actually this means that there is no judgment on this case, right?
É interessante que isso é colocado como insinuações não de que cada entrevistado faz, mas do que ele acredita que esteja ocorrendo com os outros. Ou seja, são sintomas de uma situação, embora excepcionais, mas que evidenciam um sentimento de confiança, de desconfiança generalizada em meio à competição estatística.
So here the examples that they show is not sometimes with concrete specific situations, but the ideas are they act as if they knew what will happen, or they knew what already must be happening with the results and the further developments of their actions. So these are like exceptions, or these are said to be exceptions, but they're actually symptoms of a situation. So here, this is actually the result of a generalized feeling of mistrust in the middle of statistic competition.
Não há dispositivos institucionais que permitam um retorno, que reconheça o trabalho bem feito e induza a melhorar a qualidade do trabalho. O julgamento de beleza, de que fala de jur, com relação às regras da profissão, que só seria possível se houvesse um hábito de discussão com os colegas sobre o trabalho efetivamente realizado, não é uma prática. Portanto, há dúvidas constantes sobre o que seria um trabalho bem feito e que só fazem aumentar a insegurança. O que se sabe é que existe uma cobrança com relação à quantidade dos atos que não corresponde à utilidade e ao sentido do trabalho.
So there are no institutional measures that allow this return of the work that is well done to be recognized, and this in turn enhance the quality of the work. The idea of the judgment of taste that the jury talks about in relation to the rules of the profession is only possible if there would be a habitus of a culture of discussion with the colleagues about what the work is actually done, but this is not a praxis. So there are strong doubts of what does it mean really to do a well-done job. And this only increases insecurity. What they know is that there is a demand, even though more or less explicit, in relation to the quantitative of actions that can be measured quantitatively, and that they know already that it doesn't relate to the utility and the social meaning of the work.
Então, a visibilidade dos modos operatórios, a confiança, a lealdade, a solidariedade, o diálogo sobre o trabalho, o prazer da convivência, necessários aos mecanismos de deliberação e reconhecimento pelo trabalho, são minados nas suas condições. Sem poder contar com a contrapartida do coletivo, o magistrado se vê contingenciado a empreender solitariamente e sem referenciais sólidos o seu percurso no mundo do trabalho. Com isso, aumentam os riscos de estratégias individuais e coletivas de efeitos imprevisíveis, recurso ao individualismo defensivo, agravamento das condutas adaptativas, recurso solitário à fraude, podendo ir rumo ao cinismo de desmobilização em face do cultivo do ethos profissional.
So the visibility, trust, the loyalty, solidarity, dialogue about work, the pleasure of living together, of being in the same place together, which are necessary to the mechanisms of deliberation and recognition through the work, are hindered in its conditions. If you cannot expect a counterpart from the collective part, you are led to develop a solitary work without solid references that lead to raising the risks of individual strategies with unpredictable results, also using the resource of in self-interest, in a defensive and self-interest individualism, hindering also the or lowering the conditions for adaptative conducts, and also this solitary resource to fraud, and this can lead to cynicism and dismobilization, comparing to or in relation to the cultivation of the professional ethics, ethos.
Percebe-se também, então, a conflitualização das relações entre os magistrados a partir de ideologias defensivas de grupos que se formam a partir da sua posição dentro da instituição. Ideologias defensivas em que juízes substitutos atacam juízes titulares, que todos atacam os juízes do tribunal, que por sua vez acham que os juízes de primeiro grau são descompromissados, são desleixados, perderam a relação com a profissão.
So you create an environment of conflict between and a defensive ideology between different groups within the system and different levels of the system. So the courts and the singular judges, they all start to, and in other courts they start to say, okay, to blame each other and to attribute them specific ideologies instead of thinking about this collective ethos.
Para terminar, percebe-se então que o individualismo, entre aspas, não é um ponto de partida, mas é a resultante de um processo diacrônico, passo a passo, de degradação da organização do trabalho, decorrente da introdução de práticas de gestão, e que se trata de revelar esses passos para poder resgatar. Há uma espécie de discurso defensivo do individualismo que pretende naturalizar a situação de fragmentação, invisibilizando as relações entre esse processo de fragmentação e a organização do trabalho, as opções da organização do trabalho.
So individualism is not a starting point, is actually the result of this diachronic process that step by step degrades the organization of the work and that we need to unveil in order to recover. E ao final você falou sobre discurso defensivo.
Se trata de resgatar esses espaços da relação entre o resultado do individualismo e as opções da organização do trabalho.
So we need to recover. Then this. Sorry.
Não, tu resgatar, tu desvelar,
to reveal. We need then to reveal these processes in order to recover the conditions for meaningful work and to avoid this defensive discourse.
Para concluir, com alguma esperança, do ponto de vista da psicodinâmica do trabalho, é preciso dizer que não há fatalidade em termos de organização do trabalho. É possível fazer de outro modo, pelo menos no nível organizacional, embora não seja simples. Mas não se pode esperar soluções simplistas nesse campo. Menciono apenas que, por exemplo, recentemente, no ano passado, a gente teve a oportunidade de participar da elaboração de uma resolução normativa do Conselho Nacional de Justiça, que não foi implementada até o momento, mas que transforma profundamente, transforma paradigmaticamente o quadro dos princípios e diretrizes de gestão do Poder Judiciário. Isso, quem sabe, aponta para um processo de porosidade nessas dinâmicas institucionais que refletem a utilidade de se continuar lutando. É isso.
Okay, so in a more hopeful conclusion, he stresses that these processes cannot be seen as inevitable, as something that is fatal. That it is possible to do or to create administration mechanisms in another way, but we have to avoid simplistic solutions. So, as just one example, recently the National Council of Justice has enacted a resolution with new principles and rules that have to be followed in the administration of justice. So this can be hasn't been implemented, but this can be a sign of some openings between these processes that can recover or criticize this movement of precarization and fragmentation.
Agradeço muito a atenção de vocês, peço desculpa pelo alongado e agradeço muito o trabalho do Vitor de tradução.
É isso, parabéns. Obrigado. Que você tem que ir. Sorry. So Guilherme unfortunately has to go he would present something, but he was summoned at the law school. But I'm sorry we didn't have time for you, but
I'm in touch with Vitor.
Okay, thank you, Gui. Obrigado, bye-bye. Thank you very much. So, some questions for Leonardo? Questions, you guys?
She knows. Thank you. I had one question about, two questions in fact. One is about the evaluation, the process of evaluation. Process of evaluation is it becomes to be more important in this type of organization. The flexible capitalism probably use the evaluation to control without put the control in the in the direct action of the management. And I want to ask you about this, the aspect of evaluation. Dejour has a book about this, about evaluation and this process in the organization. I think it's an interesting aspect. And the second question is for both, is about the relation with the interpretation and the critics, and the criticism. How can we do this relation? The interpretation, when we finding the meaning of something to a worker, is the same question that Olivier do, I think. It's against capitalism or not? But he lives in capitalism. Capitalism produces bad things to these workers. But they are not against capitalism, they don't tell us about this. And that is a question for me. How can we do research about meaning and at the same time do a critique about a social relation? That's my point. Understand, it's an epistemological question, okay? It's how can we research the meaning and at the same time research the aspects for critique this organization or this part of society or this aspect of the society or even the totality of society. All right, thank you.
Me ajuda? Ajuda. Então vamos lá. Primeira avaliação como um aspecto central da gestão neoliberal. Tem duas coisas aí que são importantes. Primeiro, a avaliação é central porque é a principal via de reconhecimento do fazer no trabalho. Avaliar é preciso, os trabalhadores demandam ser avaliados. Os juízes o tempo todo demandavam uma boa avaliação. Portanto, o principal problema desta avaliação inadequada é que ela ocupa o lugar de uma avaliação que deveria haver e não está.
So he's saying that evaluation is a central dimension of neoliberal administration, and the workers demand evaluation and assessments, but this type of assessment has taken the place of another assessment that could capture these other elements that we are talking about in the right to work.
Como eu tentei mostrar, a avaliação do trabalho como algo necessário, ela depende de uma série de condições relativas, sobretudo, à organização do trabalho. A possibilidade de fazer um trabalho bem feito e de haver os processos coletivos de cooperação, reconhecimento e deliberação coletiva.
So yeah, these evaluation processes blocks the possibility of having these other dimensions of the right to work being fulfilled. So identity construction, public deliberation, and
eu mencionei que a avaliação depende de condições relativas à organização do trabalho, envolvendo as possibilidades de cooperação, de reconhecimento, as práticas de reconhecimento, que são práticas informais e formais, né, e as práticas de deliberação coletiva. Mesmo a relação com a autoridade é uma relação de cooperação vertical.
Okay, so yes, probably a more normative assessment idea of assessment has to requirements, right?
Requirements to make possible the evaluation process.
Yeah, so you have to also take into account the conditions for the assessment of the organization of the work. So that leads to cooperation, practice of recognition, formal and informal, and also the public deliberation.
Bom, agora de toda forma a avaliação é só um dos dispositivos que caracterizam a gestão neoliberal que traz uma série de dispositivos de poder, né? Mas a questão da gestão por números, Alain Supiot lançou um livro recentemente que fala disso, La gouvernance par le nombre, que fala da substituição do governo pelas leis pelo governo por números, como um distanciamento total da ideia de democracia que nós conhecemos a partir desta absolutização do mercado.
So he's quoting here Supiot in his new book on the idea of governance by numbers instead of governance by laws. We have how in this neoliberal process the idea that if you only the number itself, the number as this criteria leads to the destruction of the individual. Como você falou, afinal, a avaliação por números.
A avaliação, governança por número substitui o governo pelos números substitui o governo das leis.
E levando a
isso decorre desse processo de absolutização do mercado, segundo Supiot.
Okay, so this is part of a absolutization of the market, according to Supiot.
A segunda questão que você coloca, que é esta que nós estamos debatendo aqui seguidamente um pouco, eu vejo que do ponto de vista da pesquisa empírica, de fato você vê as pessoas trabalhando com... não formulam questões, não formulam demandas contra o capitalismo, de modo geral. No entanto, há um foco de tensão que me parece especialmente acirrado a partir da formação neoliberal do capitalismo. Porque ela envolve a desconstrução das práticas de solidariedade.
So the questions that the second question he's addressing here, the problem of empirical research, similarly to Stefan, he hasn't found the direct critiques to the capitalist system as a whole, but they can sense and identify many tensions to this neoliberal procedures, especially because it deconstructs the basis of solidarity and cooperation in work.
Bases essas de solidariedade que são inerentes ao processo de trabalho coletivo. Não só por questões de valores, por questões normativas, mas também por questões de eficácia. Para atingir eficácia nos processos de trabalho, é preciso cooperar. É preciso relações de convivência, é preciso relações de solidariedade. Então, o que se percebe é que aí é um foco de tensão muito intenso. Portanto, se a gente tem práticas reais de trabalho que, e de fato é isto, que se apoiam nessas relações, não só de solidariedade, mas sobretudo de cooperação, você tem aí, e digamos assim, se é correta a leitura de que a essência do neoliberalismo é, de certa forma, a antítese destas relações de solidariedade, substituindo as relações de solidariedade por relações de competição, se essa leitura está correta, então também esta prática, digamos, intrassistêmica, de apenas lutar por boas condições de trabalho, passa a ter também um potencial crítico importante.
So what he said now here, so these bases themselves of cooperation and solidarity in work, they're not relevant only to the values and the professional ethos, but to efficacy of the work. So if the nature of neoliberal processes is to replace solidarity for competition, this leads to the idea that maybe if we have intra-systemic practices of resistance, intra-systemic practices of
Struggle for a good job,
struggle
for good
for
work.
yes, we maybe have a potential to criticize this process within the system.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Was a question to me too, I think. The relation between criticism and interpretation is a very difficult and fundamental question, I think, for any research. And it affects the question of the role of critique in society in general. And I would say that there is always, on a very generalized level, I would say there is always a tension between, a conflict between normativity and the real existence of a capitalist or other system. And if you follow norms like liberty, equality, solidarity, this has, as Axel Honneth said, I don't know the English word for, perhaps Olivier weiß it, for Geltungsüberhang in English.
A value which is above its own realization, and that can never be realized because it contains more than its the possibility to be realized in practice. So it's difficult to something like overhaul or
like overestimated or something.
No. It's the normativity is more than its realization. In simple words, so you can say you have two possibilities to interpret this. You can say that liberty, traditional Marxist interpretation, liberty in capitalist society is only on the surface, is like an ideology in relation to the reality, or you can say liberty in capitalist society is a source of critique. And you can, my point of view, can draw two consequences. The one is to criticize, knowing that it's not possible to realize this critique totally. Or you can say that you have to stop criticizing, and you are looking in a conservative point of perspective to say, oh, this criticism is pathologic and the nature of the society is this, and you have to end with criticism. And the third logic is that of Boltanski and Chapello, to say that criticism can be incorporated into the system to make it, to innovate the capitalist system. So, and I think it's the same thing for you as a researcher in this sense. You see there are potential criticism and normative Geltungsüberhang, which you find in what the interviewees say, but you don't know what is the consequences in their doing. It could be cynicism, very important that cynicism can be a consequence. And it could be that there are coming into some regressive communities, as Olivier yesterday said. I would like to know which of our interviewees are today followers of right populism. It could be because they want to have more collegiality, and perhaps they find it in this. I don't know. So this is the end, the limits of interpretation. You can see there are potential conflicts between their criticism, their norms, and the reality they experience, and the suffering they experience. But in reality, we must say that we didn't find generalized critique on capitalist society, but we see values which are not realizable in capitalist society. So it's a question: what is the consequence for them? But I have a question to Leonardo. Am I right that I can translate your formulation, the transmission from suffering to pleasure, from de jour, I think, to what I mean with appropriation of work? For in my understanding, it's nearby, or it's the same. You said people have to transmit the suffering from work. Transform the suffering from work to a pleasure, and which is not easy. And I think it's the same thinking when I say people have to appropriate the work which is. Okay. Then we are thinking the same way.
Para a psicodinâmica do trabalho, me ajuda, por favor. A psicodinâmica do trabalho se apoia numa figura que a gente chama de triângulo de Sigot, que é um antropólogo do trabalho francês, que trabalha com um triângulo ego, outro, real. O sofrimento que está em ego decorrente da relação com o real, porque ele tenta dominar o real e o real resiste, precisa ser reconhecido pelo outro para ser transformado pelo próprio ego numa relação que é sempre triangular, é sempre uma mediação, nunca uma relação apenas sujeito-sujeito. É uma relação sempre sujeito, ego alto e sujeito real, o trabalho. O que transforma o sofrimento em prazer é justamente a possibilidade que, no caso da psicanálise, é o próprio sujeito que media, de transformar aquele sofrimento num benefício no registro da identidade. Essa gratificação que vem por esse benefício no registro da identidade nesta relação triangular e que depende do olhar do outro. Não sei se...
So he's saying that he uses this French anthropologist, Sigot, this triangle between ego, alter, and real. So not only the mediation of ego with the other, but also with the real, then you create a benefit in terms of identity.
When suffering because the real is always impossible. It is always always resist your intention to demand, to mastering the real. The transformation of, but the transformation in the sense of psychodynamics, the transformation of the suffering in pleasure depends of the relation of the other, but always in this triangle. And
in psychoanalysis, you say?
In psychoanalysis, is always the own subject that makes the mediation to his inconscient. And so, but in this relation, por Por isso que o reconhecimento recai sempre sobre o fazer e não sobre a pessoa.
So that's why it says recognition is about what you do and not who you are.
Yeah.
Depends on.
Mas tem algo a mais, talvez aí, que não é só a relação, não é só pelo reconhecimento, que é o que Deju chama de um trabalho sobre si. Deju utiliza a expressão Arbeit in German to Deju use the Arbeit German expression to say this: the work that one makes on itself. And
Not only
this is
the
a process
recognition of the other.
of transformation, because the suffering is opportunity, also an opportunity to superação,
To overcome.
de overcome. The suffering demands an overcome, in the sense of a work on oneself.
So yes, not only recognition, but this work over oneself. Okay. All right, guys. Any questions? You guys have some questions? Olivier, please.
And thank you very much, Leonardo, for your presentation. I have a question concerning the case we discussed yesterday on accident. So you mentioned a lot of effects of these processes. You mentioned cynicism, break of cooperation, you mentioned suicide also, and I was wondering if suicide, if it could also be the case of failure, error in the work, failure.
Coisa do erro ou da falha no trabalho.
Sim.
I have an example in mind. A few weeks ago in Switzerland, there were a very interesting case about an accident on work. It was the how is it called, chauffeur of a train. He was in a station and he went out of the station when another train arrived, and there were a clash. So, and the second conductor died, and it was that he went with a red light. So the train.
Você entendeu o trem? Por que a última frase? Passou o sinal vermelho. Sim. Tá. Yeah, to the red.
So. And in the court, it was really interesting because he said, "No, I didn't saw the red. For me, it was green, so I went." And they joined the family of the victim, the dead man, and they joined to attack the raid company with a lot of things, saying. We are under pressure. We got penalty when we are too late. Security system has been suppressed in the last year. There are a lot of trains. So a lot of things which are really near to what you described. So we can't do our work in a good way. There is no security anymore. So they were together to attack the raid company, the CFF in Switzerland, and with a lot of things you mentioned. So with this degradation of work, of cooperation, also of security. So it is not only, and it's my point, efficacy, but also security. And in all those description you make maybe we can add the question of failure. Maybe it concerns also the judge. who can do something wrong in his judgment or in his procedure because he lacks motivation, time, capacity to speak with others on specific cases. So, and the second aspect of my question is how we can think about the question of failure with the framework of psychodynamic of work. You know, it's a real question. I don't really. I just want to hear what you can say, because you know if work is the activity of the subject in the void between rules and activity. So, if work is is the thing that rules doesn't define, is then the failure in work is also something like that. Failure is when rules are not respected, and accident also. So in such a definition, so work is illegal and failure too. And work situations are complicated because you have responsibility, you have a resistance of an object with aggression, so it happens something and this object resists and hurts you with a suffering without return in many cases when the worker dies. So how can you think about that in the framework of psychodynamic of work? So I'm really interesting. So, but it's more question than. Thank you.
There's a lot of things of this in psychodynamics of the work. I don't think, I'm not sure that I can talk about this in English, but vamos lá, vamos em português.
Translate to Stefan. With pleasure.
Primeiro, existe uma distância insuprimível entre a ordem prescrita do trabalho, aquela que emana da organização, da empresa, do empregador, com todas as regras, e a ordem real do trabalho. Se alguém deseja fazer o seu trabalho, ele precisa descumprir as regras de trabalho. O direito do trabalho imagina que trabalhar é cumprir ordens. E o que a psicodinâmica do trabalho mostra é que a essência do trabalhar é descumprir ordens. E isto é uma realidade absolutamente presente em questões de segurança do trabalho. Em empresa nenhuma, mesmo numa empresa nuclear, há várias pesquisas em psicodinâmica do trabalho. Há uma pesquisa gigantesca que foi feita anos atrás na indústria nuclear francesa, que é muito, muito grande. E essas questões estão o tempo todo presentes. Trabalhadores precisam desenvolver estratégias para conseguir fazer um bom trabalho que não estão prescritas. E muitas vezes descumprir as regras prescritas para poder fazer um bom trabalho. Por exemplo, os controladores da pressão das usinas nucleares, que tinham que passar o dia inteiro acompanhando um quadro eletrônico de monitoramento, desenvolveram uma técnica de jogar cartas como única forma de manter a atenção no painel, por exemplo. O problema é que isto significa assumir um risco. Assumir um risco de estar violando a regra. Afinal de contas, estar jogando cartas no trabalho é algo inaceitável do ponto de vista da ordem prescrita. Isso significa que, para que, por exemplo, possa haver uma cooperação no trabalho, é preciso que haja visibilidade disto que em psicodinâmica do trabalho se chama de tricherie, de traições, de trapaças. Porque todos trapaceiam o tempo todo para poder fazer o trabalho. Mas há uma diferença entre a fraude e a tricherie. E essa diferença, quem permite mediar é esse ethos profissional, esse ethos do trabalho. Mas isso depende de processos de diálogo no interior da organização. Porque se esses trabalhadores que jogam carta serão punidos por estarem jogando cartas, ou se o trabalhador, por exemplo, estou imaginando, o chofer do trem, por conta da pressão de tempo, por exemplo, ele assume o risco de que ele sabe que de um sinal ao outro ele pode desenvolver a velocidade X, para chegar no outro sinal exatamente no momento em que ele abre, e com isso não perder tempo. Algo que não é permitido no regulamento. Mas que, por um outro fato, porque a variabilidade das condições de trabalho é imensa, naquele momento o segundo sinal mudou o seu tempo. E pode ser que isso tenha levado ao acidente. Entende? O problema é que, no segundo momento, aquilo que normalmente se aceita, do ponto de vista da ordem real do trabalho, passa a ser punido pela organização. E aí há um problema grave de confiança, de trust. Isso, porque se eu preciso esconder as minhas tricheries, se eu preciso esconder o meu modo operatório, isto implica em um isolamento, isso inicia um processo que é um processo de desolação, de solitude, e que é um processo com riscos psíquicos muito grandes também. Não sei se o que a psicodinâmica do trabalho fala sobre essas situações passam por aí. Então, por exemplo, em toda a situação de acidente de trabalho, a resposta mais óbvia, que normalmente é a abordagem que a justiça do trabalho faz dos acidentes, é dizer, não, aconteceu o acidente porque o operador falhou. Mas isso já é da tradição, por exemplo, das investigações de grandes acidentes, perceber que há sempre um sistema de causas, um sistema de condicionantes, pelo menos, em vários segmentos. Há vários autores que trabalham isso, há várias teorias sobre esses diversos conjuntos de fatores que vão precipitar no acidente. Né? Mas se trata então de um processo de construção de realidade nesse segundo momento, fraudando a confiança que se tinha, né? Imputar ao trabalhador exclusivamente a responsabilidade pela faute, pela falha. Né? Mas falhar é inerente a toda a situação de trabalho, o tempo todo, e descumprir regras é inerente a toda a situação de trabalho, o tempo todo. Se um juiz cumprir rigorosamente todas as regras processuais, ele não vai atingir um bom resultado, por exemplo.
Niklas Luhmann would say this is usable illegality. Usable illegality. You can describe this process in organizational terms as system theoretic, as usable illegality. And it's a process to address the causes of usable illegality if it fails, if it's not successful to the individual. The individual as not part of the organization in thinking of Luhmann. The organization is right.
But it means that work is illegality in this definition.
No,
work is illegal.
To be creative with the formal rules, this is illegality. In the moment when it fails, when it's not successful. As for instance, the manipulation of diesel automobiles by VW, would be very wonderful if it was succeeded, and it failed. It was opened, and then you are looking for the engineers who did it wrong. It's the same thing.
But just, I think it's really interesting, but the boundaries between the two are not so clear when we accept the definition of de jour, because if you take the definition of accident, it comes from the Greek, which is something that suggere, so something that appears in a way that is really rapidly and uncalculated. It is an event. O acidente é uma coisa que surge de uma maneira imprevisível. Então, é uma coisa que é como um objeto que está lá, se manifestando na sua própria realidade. Então, acho que o acidente tem uma proximidade muito forte com o que o de jour define com o trabalho, que as limites não são muito claras.
Accident is from the order of the real. The accident is from the real order of the work. Maybe in a kind of Lacanian sense, the accident is the real that appear. And we must symbolize the real.
So then the question is on the side of the law, to decide who is responsible. So when something happens in a way that the worker cannot, or is injured, is not just suffering, but an accident is a break in the action, so it cannot continue. So I think it's a very interesting case to think.
Eu diria que, de modo geral, o direito o processo judicial se transforma ao mesmo tempo num espaço de dramatização desse fato que é preciso significar, né? Então ele tem o processo judicial tem essa dimensão dramatúrgica do acidente, mas ao mesmo tempo ele tem uma dimensão de guerra estratégica, no aspecto central, que é a relação entre produção e saúde, e corpo, né? Porque o que se vê no processo judicial acerca do acidente é uma luta em torno da culpabilização de alguém pelo fato do acidente, né?
Uma pergunta? Legal. Então, okay, guys. Well, thank you very much again, Leonardo. It was very interesting, your talk. Round of applause for you. Thank you, guys. So let's take a break for lunch, and then we go back at the 5th floor again in the smaller auditorium. Okay, thank you.
Poxa, obrigado.
Foi ótimo, que isso, cara. Foi bom. Eu que peço desculpas aí.